Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Vanessa Lovatt, your moderator for today's session, which is Beyond Numbers, Unveiling the True Impact of Events. This webinar is proudly brought to you by Event Footprints and is part of their Best Foot Forwards webinar series, where we tackle some of the biggest challenges and most talked about topics facing event professionals today. So thank you so much for joining us, and you are absolutely in the right place if you have ever wrestled with proving the true value of your events. And by that, I don't just mean on a spreadsheet, but I mean in a way that resonates across your business, with your board, and makes a real strategic impact on your business. Now, before we dive in, just a little bit of housekeeping. We will be recording today's session. We always get asked this in the chat, and you will get a follow-up email with the replay link pretty shortly after we wrap up. Now, we would love you to use the chat and emoji reactions as we go. Chat's on the right-hand side, and the emoji reactions are just at the bottom, probably just below my face from where you're looking, because we really want this to feel like a conversation and not a lecture. And you using that chat and those emojis really helps us to read the room. Also, you'll find the Ask the Speaker section. That's where you can send questions through to us. So please do send your questions through. We might answer one or two on the way through, but we'll certainly be leaving time at the end to answer as many as we can. So to get us all feeling a little bit connected before I introduce our wonderful speakers for today, can you just drop an emoji in, use the chat, just tell us how you're feeling. Are you energized? Are you feeling a little afternoon slump? Tell us how you're joining us today. And today isn't just about data. It is about giving you the clarity and the confidence that you really need to make a difference. Oh, I can hear the clapping coming through as well. That you need to have the right next steps in mind for getting event measurement right. So I am very lucky to be joined today by a wonderful expert in this field, Conrad Mills from Forrester. And Conrad brings a real marketing slant to the conversation today. He's a treasure trove of stats and facts and knowledge. Conrad, hello, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the intro.
Oh no, I mean, the intro is just the beginning. There's going to be far more coming, I know. And also Rob Curtis, who is always a feature on the Best Foot Forward webinar series. Rob's the founder of Event Footprints, and I think it's fair to say that you are right in the deep practical strategy with companies who are trying to do this day in, day out. So Rob, it's great to have you here.
Thank you. Yeah, and just want to add, it's brilliant that Conrad could join us today. It's I've been a massive fan of the Forrester reports that they produce around event measurement and B2B marketing. So to have Conrad join us is brilliant. So thank you, Conrad, for joining us on today's webinar.
And thank you again to our attendees. We've got Lisbon, we have Houston, plenty from the UK, and aren't we literally having the most fantastic weather here? I'm sorry, I am a full-blown Brit. I love to talk about the weather. It's great to see some folks joining from lots of different places, but let's crack in. So I'm going to come to Conrad first and just fire the big question at you, Conrad, which is, can you walk us through the key challenges that you are consistently seeing when it comes to event measurement today? Let's start at the top.
Yeah, Sean, I think there's probably 5 challenges. For me, one of the biggest is a failure to agree smart objectives for events. I come across lots of organizations where they are looking to measure the impact of an event. They're asking for help about what to measure, but they haven't set clear objectives up front. And if you haven't done that, if you don't know what you're looking to achieve with your event, it's almost impossible to select the right metrics. And it leads organizations to rely on vanity metrics. So that's one pretty big challenge. I also work with a lot of teams, event teams, who are fantastic at event execution. And clearly that's really, really important, but they're not necessarily so good at connecting events to business outcomes, business strategies. And I think that's a gap for some teams. I think a lot of us suffer with bigger events where we've got multiple stakeholders as well, all with a slightly different perspective on what the objective of that event is, and kind of getting everybody on board with the primary objectives of an event can be hard. I think also, there's challenges around event technology, which, and I know we're going to dig into this later, oftentimes is siloed from the rest of the sales and marketing tech stack. So the data that you need for measurement is kind of stuck in siloed platforms, or in some cases, we're not using platforms, particularly with field events. The data's in spreadsheets. So actually getting the data to where you need for measurement is a challenge. And the final one I'd call out is ROI as a metric. A lot of people are really focused on this idea of showing how an event has led to pipeline signings, revenue. And the reality of business to business buying is an event is just one of many interactions that an individual as part of a buying group goes through on a journey or during the buying process. So trying to make that direct connection is tenuous. So lots and lots of challenges.
I had an exact experience of that just on Tuesday this week in an organisation where an event was attributed as being the original source of a contract, and the salesperson said, hang on a minute. So I think you're right in taking that collaborative approach, very important. Quick follow-up question for you, Conrad. What would a vanity metric be in your experience?
So what I see oftentimes where we haven't set clear goals, and it happens a lot with third-party events. So, the sorts of events that organizations sponsor year on year, they haven't kind of really thought about whether it's the right event. You've got sales saying, we need to be there. We're always there. And then come the end of the event, you kind of need to justify the event. So you look at those 3,000 booth scans that you've made. Right. Wasn't that a fantastic event? We've scanned 3,000 people, regardless of whether or not, they were queuing for lunch. You've got that lead scan, so it was a successful event. And it's just trying to justify the event when you've not set objectives and you've not agreed proper metrics.
Brilliant. Thank you. I'm actually going to hoik a question that I had slightly later in the webinar forwards, because you mentioned third-party events there. So, Rob, I'm going to ask you to talk on this a little bit. We, as a group, when we were preparing for this, we talked quite a lot about third-party events. So somewhere you might go and exhibit. We talked about owned events that you might run for your own marketing purposes. We also talked about internal events as well. Rob, how should we be treating event measurement differently across those three different types of events? And what struggles do you find you're helping clients with on the whole?
Yeah, I think, with marketing-led events, growth events, which typically would fall under third-party or proprietary events, there's that ROI piece, which is based on growth, how much pounds and pence we're generating from these event activations. Some of the work that we've been doing for some large organisations is around their internal events program, and actually, it's not necessarily about pounds and pence, but actually it's about engaging and retaining our staff and educating them on new strategy, making sure they understand the new strategy and that they're bought in to our organisation's future strategy. So in that environment, we typically work, where events teams are working alongside internal communications teams, employee engagement teams. But I think in that instance, the measurement criteria can be quite different because there is no monetary value as per se. It's all around the employee experience, if you like. So it's a slightly different way of measurement, if you like, because there are different factors at play for the audience, if you like.
And what do you say are the greatest challenges that you tend to keep seeing? Let's go with third party and proprietary growth events, like putting them both under that bracket. What are the biggest challenges that you tend to see customers of yours are struggling with?
Yeah, I think, as Conrad said, I think it's that stakeholder alignment piece is probably one of the biggest ones, and it's actually working out, the needs and wants for the stakeholder group, and actually every single stakeholder that's involved in these activations have got different outcomes that they want to achieve and measurement outcomes that they want to achieve from these activations. So it's about understanding those needs and wants from those stakeholder groups. I think that's a bigger challenge. And I think that there's a misunderstanding in the industry around what these technologies can offer and how they can be connected. So we actually had a conversation at our Event Tech World dinner last week where we were talking around this whole idea of universal lead capture, where organizations can go to their third-party events with their own lead capture solution connected to their own CRM and MarTech instance, and scan people on the stand. And so that whole speed to lead element is optimized because it's straight into their own existing enterprise system. So I think that there is an educational piece needed around what these technologies can do and how they can be connected to our organization's own infrastructure.
Like that. That makes a lot of sense. And we are going to come back to technology a little bit later. And we're going to push a poll in a moment. And whilst that poll is running, I have a couple of questions. Probably are going to come to Conrad for the first question. But if we could get the first poll pushed live, and then our audience can answer that. You may have to scroll down to find your biggest event measurement challenge. We tried to make the list as short as possible. Rob, back to you. Can you give a real life anonymized example? Rob is always very diplomatic and never names his customers. But can you give us a real life anonymized example of where a company facing some of those challenges, so perhaps around stakeholder alignment, for example, because you both said that now already, or getting the right objectives and goals in place for an event and how they've overcome it? Maybe if you can give us a little inkling of what sort of company it is, at least that would be helpful.
Yeah, so we typically work, I'm going to be very broad when I say we typically work with professional service companies, tech companies, and finance companies. And I think in terms of their customer events side of things, I think working with some of these teams, our sort of entry point is typically been through event ops or marketing teams. But the core of where you have to get buy-in to really develop this kind of whole measurement initiative is you've got to get IT's buy-in as well, right? Mm-hmm. So they're the team that sort of are going to be implementing these technologies, supporting these technologies, and traditionally in events world, IT teams and events teams haven't really engaged too much over history. So I think that's the biggest challenges. I think is getting the IT teams understanding what these technologies do and how they can be used to support measurement. Mm-hmm. IT teams, they will. It's about understanding, if going down the all-in-one route, what the whole ecosystem does, or if an organisation is using best-in-class components for different elements, is actually how those tech tools integrate and how they can then also be supported by IT as well. So I think we see that as I guess they are the conduit between the sales, marketing, and events team, if you like, to bring all that together.
I find that quite fascinating because I think as event professionals, we probably don't wake up many mornings and think, I must build my relationship with IT today. But actually what you're saying there is that perhaps that is something that should at least be on the program of activities during an event life cycle. Conrad, you have explained recently to both Rob and to me, and I'm sure there are others who may be aware of this, but I also suspect many won't, that the cost of hosting an attendee at an event has gone up so much in recent years. And that's one of the reasons this is really putting pressure on event professionals to demonstrate the value that an event is representing to an organisation. Could you explain the 92% stat to the audience? I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, so we've got Forrester data that shows that approximately 2/3 of organisations have had an event budget that is flat or down for the last 2 years. But at the same time, even if your budget's going up, and that's kind of just 1/3 of organisations, there's data that shows that the average cost to host an attendee at an in-person event has increased by just shy of 100% over the last 4 years. So even if you're kind of in that small, I think it's around 5% of organisations where the budget's been going up 10% the last 2 years, in real terms, at best, it's flat. And that's one of the reasons why event measurement is such a focus at the moment, because teams' budget resource is under massive pressure, and teams are having to go back to the business. And quite rightly, the business is asking them to justify increased investment, show the value of the events that they're already doing. And I think I've shared, the single biggest source of client inquiry I've had over the last 18 months is help me to measure my events better. So it's,
I'm definitely seeing a lot more interest in this, both online, social media, LinkedIn, but also in other communities that I'm a part of. This is, we have to do better, but how do we do this better? So here we go, biggest challenges. Now, this is interesting. I mean, clearly there's a winner, but it would be, it's not super strong underneath that, but strategic thinking, operation takes over. I suspect Conrad will not be at all surprised to see that. Siloed data, I'm certainly not surprised to see that. Integration, this is a really challenging one, and we're going to come on to that actually really quite soon. So not a huge surprise in there. Lack of knowledge on tech, quite low though. I find that very, very encouraging. Anything that stands out to either of you in those results?
No, I think it obviously the siloed data piece is a key one. I think all these platforms are collecting all this brilliant data, but it's just sat all over the place, and it's having that single view overview of what this data means to be able to articulate it better. And if it's all over the place, it's impossible to do that, right? So I'm not surprised that's high.
Let's move on to the next section, which is around bringing metrics that have real meaning and are connected to your business goals. So I asked Conrad a little bit earlier about vanity metrics, and we want to try and take this on a little bit more now to actually, how do we really connect your event up with your business goals? Now, first question, I'm going to come to you, Rob, on this, because you have really specific framework that you like to work with. There are 4 pillars in it, and it sort of runs pre, during, post, roughly speaking. Do you want to explain how you use that to make metrics align with the business, make the events align with the business?
Yeah, absolutely. And should mention that this framework is changing all the time as we're learning and evolving about what people want and listening to our customers. I guess it all stems from when we started Event Footprints just 2 years ago, and we were building data visualizations for organizations. It soon became apparent that there was so much data that it almost became a little bit overwhelming for our stakeholders to articulate what that data actually means. So we spent some time looking at and asking our clients around how do we consult on this, and how do we help you predominantly articulate what this data means when we produce this. So we came up with 4 pillars of event measurement. Okay, so the first one was data that measures reach and acquisition, which is broadly speaking a more marketing-led initiative. How are people signing up for an event? How is our marketing performing? Are we getting the right customers at the event first and foremost? Are they coming from the right industries and the right geo units, for example? And then we looked at the pillar 2, which was around, okay, how do we capture and visualize data that supports the operation and logistical running of the event? So the how, if you like, and actually looking at data that supports, going back to our stakeholder group, the ops and logistics part of those events. Then we moved on to the third pillar, which was looking at engagement and experience. So this was very much around the on-site experience. How do people interact with each other, with the event, with sessions, with content at the event, and how can we utilize that data to measure ultimately attendee value, that our attendees have come to our event, they've got value, they've learned something new, they've contributed, and they've connected. So that whole pillar itself, that engagement and experience piece is probably out of all of them, but still the thing that most people, it's easiest to measure, and it's the one that most people want, if you like, because we put in all these events to provide a great experience for our attendees, right? And then the third one is around the impact and ROI piece. So that's looking at, after the event, how does that translate into measurement to support our business outcomes? Being, is it about generating opportunity, capturing new leads, or is it, in the case of an internal event that we've talked about, is it just a case of measuring that people have learned something new and actually we might be able to change some behaviours as a result of what we've communicated at our event?
Thank you. You partially answered a question that was put in the Q&A that we'll hopefully get to towards the end of the session. Conrad, in your opinion and your experience, because you've helped many companies do exactly this in the last 18 months or so, how should organisations be aligning event goals with business goals?
So for me, the starting point is talking to the business and understanding what the business goals are and how events can best support those goals. Ideally, you also want to be thinking about events as part of broader integrated marketing campaigns and programs, not treating them as siloed activities, thinking about the roles that events can play and different formats of events, whether it's your own, third party, large, small, in progressing either kind of opportunities that are in motion or identifying new opportunities, and by understanding what the business is looking to achieve and agreeing objectives with stakeholders. So you mentioned stakeholders, Rob, and I think it's really, really important to sit down in advance with key stakeholders and understand what it is they're looking for from the event, and then selecting the right metrics given those stakeholder objectives.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, this stakeholder point. It actually also came up at a dinner that Rob and I were at together last week, loudly. And this third party versus proprietary owned events was a big topic of conversation around this, that with the third party events, the stakeholder alignment's often a little bit easier than the owned events, where suddenly you've got many different contributing voices and it can get quite confused, but that also the cost of those third party events are also making it very, very hard to justify those, as opposed to the amount of impact that you can potentially prove and have within an owned event. So it was a really interesting conversation. I'm going to bring up another poll now and ask our audience what you find most difficult to directly link your events to your organizational goals with. So when it comes to measuring your events, which of these, if we could push that poll up, business goals, do you find it hardest to push together and get those event results coming through? So I think that poll will come up shortly. So Rob, you've talked, perfect, there it is. So give us a little answer on that. And we'll just talk through these briefly. So brand and reputation, attendee value, customer engagement, demand gen, and employee engagement. So again, this is looking at those internal events specifically, and perhaps the person who's posted a question around those internal events might find that's the biggest challenge that they have, that find most difficult. Any forecasts from either of you? Let's start with Conrad on which might come up highest in our poll result.
So the one that I hear a lot of clients tell me they struggle with is brand and reputation. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that would be my guess.
Rob, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think it's one of the hardest to measure, given that a lot of these events are a moment in time. So.
Well, let's close the poll and see what the results are. And Conrad, why do you think it is? Why is brand reputation so much harder on the whole for the customers that you work with?
So I think there's a couple of reasons. I think sometimes, going back to kind of the reason, the objectives behind an event, we try to justify events as we're doing this for brand and awareness, and we kind of leave it at that. And that is not a smart objective. So if you haven't defined a clear, specific goal around brand and awareness, then it's going to be almost impossible to show that it's been successful to select the right metrics. So that's kind of one thing. The other challenge I see is just what do we actually measure to show that? Ideally, you're talking about investment in pre and post-event brand perception and awareness studies. And I've come across some organizations that have done that, but that's additional investment.
Yeah.
So the vast majority are relying on media coverage, social metrics, and at best they're a poor proxy for
and I suppose as well,
reputation.
At the same time that your event is happening, there could be many other things that are happening that would influence any of those metrics that you've talked about there, whether they're direct surveys or whether it's social media coverage, for example. So, okay, you were both correct. First up, brand and reputation. Attendee value number 2. I find that very interesting and perhaps a little bit bothersome as well, actually. Let's talk around that briefly. Rob, measuring attendee value, I know how important this is for you. Why do you think that might have scored quite so highly?
Yeah, surprising. So I think the way that I personally have sort of approached this sort of pillar, if you like, or challenge is I always think to myself, if you're going to an event yourself, you're not putting one on, but you're actually going as an attendee, what would be the best experience for you? And for me personally, it's learning something new. It's making my voice heard by contributing where I see fit. And it's also connecting with the right people. And that might be just loosely over conversations, over informal networking, or it might be something a little bit more structured, like one-on-one meetings and the quality of those meetings. So I always, and I've been to events where I've literally gone and I may have sat in one content stream, but actually I'm more interested in going to meet like-minded people. So I think in terms of that attendee value piece, I always think a good way to approach that is to ask yourself, what would you want to get out of your experience at an event? And then how does that apply to our audience?
And actually go to an event or two. I hear this so often. Event organisers, they go to an event, they're like, wow, I'm here as an attendee. This never happens. But actually, it's somewhat the best research you can do, isn't it? We've got a question that's come through around tech. So I'm going to move the conversation on now to the next section that we'd like to cover. And we call this tech that helps and tech that hinders. And I'm sure all of our viewers can identify with one of those or both of those, perhaps from their experience of using event technology. Now, there's a question about integrations. We're going to come to that as well. In fact, let's just get straight into that, Conrad. You have shared a statistic that Forrester have, that 1 in 5, and I'm sure you'll make this exactly correct, but 1 in 5 organizations have integrated their event tech completely, I'm going to say, with their CRM or CDP, customer data platform. That's a really low number. And when you shared that, I did have a bit of a combination of that's really low, but also things can only get better, really, if we're at 1 in 5. But what's getting in the way of this? What's proving to stop companies making progress here? And just before you answer, I'm going to suggest that you just hit mute and then unmute, because that was what fixed your audio gremlin last time. So we're going to take a little punt on this and see if it works. Let's see how we go.
How's that?
I can hear you.
Super. So I think there's multiple reasons. I think in a lot of organizations, event tech has historically been managed in somewhat of a silo to the rest of the sales and marketing tech stack. So that's kind of one reason. There has also been a proliferation of event technology over the last 5 years, and we've got separate data that looks at the number of platforms inside the average organization. I worked with one client last year that was managing over 40 different event technology platforms. And you've got that much event tech. What do you integrate? How do you integrate it? It just becomes incredibly messy and complex. And I also work with a lot of organizations where decisions around event technology are getting taken in silos by sometimes the event team. And the focus is on technology for event execution, not thinking about the data we're capturing, where that goes, how we maximize its value post-event. So I think if I were to summarize it, it's that event technology is seen as a tactical event execution tool and not kind of a strategic component of the broader sales and marketing tech stack. And it absolutely should be. The amount of data that we capture through our events and the value that can deliver, we need to be doing better in terms of getting that into the map, the CRM, the CDP.
Yes, you've also reminded me, you did share an example of an event where they had captured a staggering 7-figure data point. Do you want to just share a little insight into that?
Yeah, and this brought it home to me. It was an organization I was talking to. It's probably about 12 months or so back now, and they shared that it was a close to 10,000 attendee 2-day event. So, pretty big tier 1 event, but they captured over 1 million data points, engagement points on the attendees at that event over the course of the event.
Yeah.
And they had integrated, so all of that data was going where it needed to go.
Oh, that's I don't recall that bit of the story. That's the joyous piece of the story. So actually it's worth capturing all of that data. Wow. Conrad, you often talk about creating these integrations around a core event platform specifically. And this then has led us on to conversations about, do you go with the all-in-one platform approach? And I do that because what does that really mean? There's still somewhat needs defining, but you can also take a best-in-class approach. And Rob, you've seen both, haven't you, in your journeys with different clients and different setups. So from what you've seen, what are the key differences in how you would approach identifying the right tech if you've gone down the best-in-breed approach as opposed to the all-in-one approach? And what are the practical realities of the different approaches as well?
I think so what has been quite interesting in terms of the way that some of the larger all-in-one platforms are positioning themselves, gone are the days when they are focusing on the ops and efficiency of running an event. And I think it's quite interesting now that they're sort of repositioning themselves as a piece of MarTech, and this whole value around collecting more data from our audiences throughout the whole event lifecycle. So I think that's really interesting in terms of how these big organizations are pitching themselves now. I think so this whole all-in-one versus best-in-class approach, we see I think a lot of organizations are still driving the attendee value. So it's like, how do we support a brilliant experience for our attendees using a best-in-class technology for each component? Okay, and we've worked with a lot of organizations who have that approach. The challenge then is that you've then got to integrate not just the event tech into their sales and marketing platforms, but also you've got to integrate the event tech with each other, registration, apps, on-site badging, smart badging, lead capture, whatever it might be. So there's an integration level at that point. So that's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is this all-in-one approach, and the major benefit around those types of solutions is that you've got a single database of client insight, if you like, across that whole event lifecycle. So there's two sort of pros and cons. I think it's the organisations that are putting attendee experience and this whole best in class first and foremost. I mean, all the all-in-one solutions, I've always personally felt that they are amazing, but actually, if you think about the breadth of what they're having to develop, really complex registration, a brilliant event app, a brilliant on-site badging and data capture solution, that's quite a lot to be able to develop and do it really well. And I always liken this analogy that with event apps, for example, people always ask, well, why doesn't it do this in terms of the messaging, and why doesn't it do that? And it's like, I think people's expectations are that the messaging in an event app needs to be the same as we'd get in like WhatsApp.
Yep.
So there's which is a best in breed, a message. Well, some people might argue it's not, but it's a dedicated messaging tool. So it's I always kind of use that analogy a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good one. But it also is representative of the fact that attendee, sponsor, speaker experiences have all elevated significantly in the last 5 years. It's about the same level that costs have increased. So we've got increased costs for using all of these wonderful things, increased expectation, and they just both keep going up and actually really don't, we need one to go down for there to be alignment overall. Conrad, when we were preparing for this, we also talked about where you're doing the event measurement. And you just talked there about sometimes the tools that might be identified to be appropriate. Usually the event tech tools might be identified that end up being more for event delivery, perhaps more operational purposes than overall results. And that's where the measurement opportunities then end up kind of getting stuck. Where and how, and I know this is going to depend on the sort of event to a certain extent, but where should most people be trying to capture event measurement, and how do they go about doing that? Conrad, just hit mute and then come back. This is a whole new experiment for us.
So I think measurement can take place in lots of different places. What I have seen with, I would say, kind of the most strategic organizations I've spoken to is that their focus is on getting the data out of the event tech platform as quickly and seamlessly as possible into a data lake where they've got kind of standalone BI tools to help them analyze that data.
Great.
That said, even the organizations that are doing that tell me there are elements of measurement that they still actually want to do inside the event management platform. Yeah. So it kind of depends what you're looking to achieve with the event, what metrics you've selected, and where you can best do that measurement. I just wanted to come back to the all-in-one question, if I can as well, because I think that's connected. And for me, the primary value in having a foundational event technology platform is it enables you to capture data more consistently across a wider range of events. So you're using a single platform for your tier 1 event, but also your tier 2, your tier 3, your field events, those hundreds, in some cases thousands of events, where at the moment a lot of organizations are not using any technology. The data is getting captured in spreadsheets and getting lost. I don't think it precludes kind of then using other solutions and integrating them into that primary platform. But I do see tremendous value in putting that in place.
Yeah, I see. There's so much value in repeatability, isn't there? And familiarity and consistency. Certainly when it comes to team bandwidth, which in the world of events is always very stretched. And talking of team bandwidth, Rob, can you talk a little bit about who in the team might be responsible for the tech enablement? And also, could you share the example you had recently? You were at a very large event somewhere in fabulous Florida. It was a 14,000 person event, and at the back of the room or somewhere, there was a squad responsible for the event tech as well. So first half of the question is, how does this tend to fall responsibility-wise? You mentioned the IT alignment right at the beginning, but who are the hands-on folks? And then tell us about that example on-site at an event as well.
So taking that example, there was a whole mix of different stakeholders from ops, marketing and IT, but their sole focus was tech, the event tech and experience. What was also quite interesting in that particular event was talking about event IT, is they had a dedicated IT team that would go on site to deploy the whole infrastructure to support the connectivity at the events. It was it was a mixture of all those sort of three disciplines: ops, marketing, and IT. The bit that was a real eye opener for me, I think, was I've worked in events a long time, and traditionally there's been groups of on-site event technicians, and that might be audio visual production teams, but it was the first time I'd ever really experienced such a large dedicated team solely focused on the event tech deployment. And there was probably 5 or 6 different suppliers, representatives from each of those suppliers. There was a mixture of integration specialists, tech consultants, marketers, data analysts, all working together in dedicate, even to the point they had a dedicated room set up for 50 stakeholders focusing on the deployment of the whole experience. So I think that was a great example where there's been that, with that particular brand, there's been that mindset shift in that actually the event tech is so important to our experience that we need all of these skills and these people on site to support us in developing this experience.
Thank you. I've got a couple more questions for each of you, and then we've got some fantastic questions from the audience. Please do send your questions into the Ask the Speaker section, because we are going to come to those very soon. This question's one slightly different question for each of you, but fundamentally this is around how do we use this data? How do we actually tell the story upwards that takes events out of the operational realm and puts events in the boardroom with a seat at the table, and actually really proves that all of this data we've got shows the events have been worthwhile. So Rob, you mentioned the strategic potential of all this there, where you've given us an example where you talked about a brand that have taken this big change in approach. How did they build that narrative, which takes it from a room of 50 people sitting at the back of a large event, turning the wheels and making this happen, to this is being presented back to the board, back to the stakeholders on what impact this event actually had?
I think when you look at the data that we can capture from these events, is there's two for us. There's two elements to it. There's data and insights that measure the impact of the event from a stakeholder perspective. As a high level overview, as Conrad said, many organisations using BI tools to look at that data, and being able to then slice and dice that data by any demographic or firmographic information that you might want to review your attendee attendee insights on. But then there's also that actionable data, is that based on what we've captured at our event, how can we utilise that to inform our post-event marketing strategy or our post-event sales enablement strategy? How do we, Conrad said earlier about these vanity metrics, how do we capture 3,000 leads, but actually it's all very well, but then what do we do with them? And actually, how do we then utilise the platforms to make that data actionable for our sales team in the quickest way possible? So I think there's two parts to that. Is what do we need to show our CFO or CMO, the budget holder, and or the stakeholder team, but then also what data is then actionable for our teams to execute on.
Thank you. And Conrad, whilst I ask you this question, just hit the mute button. So for your customers and the folks that you work with, what are the biggest challenges that you tend to see, or pitfalls that you see they might fall into with this narrative, this storytelling, final completion of event measurement? And how do you help them with that? What advice do you find you tend to keep giving? Just try the mute on and off once more.
We like to talk about a hierarchy of metrics, and I'll just kind of explain what I mean by that, and then sort of how I encourage clients to think about event metrics. So one class of metric are activity metrics, and they're kind of counts of what we've done. So from an event perspective, it might be something like number of registrations, number of attendees, number of booth scans, useful metrics and important to certain stakeholders, but they don't showcase the value of an event. And for that, you need to move up one level in the hierarchy, and those are what we call output metrics. And this is where you're starting to think about what the result of the activity has been. So, for example, rather than number of booth scans an activity metric, what percentage of those, how many of those met the quality threshold that was agreed with stakeholders pre-event? That then becomes an output metric. There is one higher level class of metric, which we call an impact metric. And this is where you are measuring the effect of an activity on a business level goal. And the majority of events will not have impact level metrics, because ideally they should be part of broader programs and campaigns. And you measure the campaign at the impact level. But for some of the largest tier 1 events, you might want impact level metrics. So that could be something like changes in brand perception and awareness. Going back to what we were talking about earlier, if you're able to invest in a proper brand perception study pre and post event, you might want to measure that, and that would be related to the goal that you've set for the event. So we like to think about kind of metrics in terms of that hierarchy. And in terms of the challenge, I think we focus too much on activity level metrics. Really useful for the event team and some stakeholders, but they don't showcase the value of the event, particularly to sales stakeholders. They're not interested in the number of registrations. It's how many strategic accounts engage with us at the event. That's a more interesting metric.
I almost feel like what you're saying without saying it is that you need to be preparing your board presentation on day one of your event lifecycle, which is what do we want to communicate, and then you spin backwards so what have we got to do to be able to demonstrate exactly this. We're going to go to audience. Sorry, Rob, go ahead.
Just a quick question on that. That's a big, broad question to ask your stakeholder team, right? It's having that confidence to actually be quite disruptive and say, why are we doing this? And that isn't it? And I think that's part of the challenge, is that how do we educate us as event organisers to be able to have that tough conversation? Let's be honest. And I always, on our first webinar that we did earlier in the year with Faye Carter from Deloitte, she coined this phrase, and she takes full credit for it. There's FOFO. So she coined this phrase, the fear of finding out. And every time I mention that to people, everyone's like, yes, there's this fear of finding out that actually are our events performing or are they not? Are we doing, we've done these events for 20 years and should we continue doing them going forward? And I think it's having the confidence of those big, broad questions.
I love FOFO. I think it's brilliant. A definite takeaway for everyone. Right, let's get into some questions. So first one's just popped through, but I'm going to go with the one I'm reading, which is for Rob. This is from Aaron from Interactive. Rob, I really like the 4 pillars you outlined. When you look at your pillar 3, which I think was around on-site engagement, but please correct me if I'm wrong, what are the typical measures you're measuring that can prove, for example, attendee value? And especially in very long sales cycles. So let's assume I'm going to go with a sales cycle of 18 months. Let's try and make this somewhat real. So what are you measuring most usefully and most frequently when it comes to on-site engagement? And particularly, how do you make that useful for an events team to communicate back with very long sales cycles?
So I think it goes back to asking yourself the question, as an individual, what do you want to get out of the event? And I think if as human beings, we probably, we go to these events to connect, to learn, and to contribute. And how do we then capture data then to prove that, if you like? So it's things like the connections that you make, the meetings that you have, the sessions that you go to, how much you contributed, and you can almost argue that having somebody who's highly engaged in your event and being able to map out their event journey on site, not just on site but across the whole event life cycle, that gives you more insight to be able to personalize the follow-up with them, a real tailored approach from the sales and marketing team, which would in turn generate more personalized conversations to optimize that outcome, if you like. But the ROI piece, in terms of deal value and sales tools is can be long in a lot of instances and large value. And so then you get into the realms of how much revenue do we attribute to the event versus how much are we saying of that revenue is influenced by the event. So they're kind of different metrics. And we actually did some work last year with a big recruitment firm, well-known recruitment firm, and they were starting to look at A/B testing to see actually if we know our deal value is X and we know our typical sales cycle is Y. If we stick an event in the middle, does the deal value go up and the sales cycle shorten? And the answer was yes. And ultimately, that's the golden chalice, right? Is actually if we stick an event in the middle of does it act as a catalyst for better business outcomes?
Awesome. Thank you, Rob. My next question is for Conrad. I say mine. It's actually from Adam Sharp, and it's a little bit of a challenger question, this one. Okay. This is regarding where measurement and event data should be sitting. So Adam's question is, shouldn't event data be directed towards the marketing automation system so that marketing can track attribution, and not the CRM system or the CDP, which tends to be owned by IT and not marketing? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think it can work either way. And I've worked with some clients where the event data is flowing into the map and the map's connected to the CRM. If ultimately, though, our primary focus of an event is around demand, and we are measuring opportunity progression inside the CRM, we need to understand how event engagement has impacted on opportunity progression. So, for example, it might be really interesting to see if opportunities move faster through the pipeline where X% of buying group members are engaged. Mm-hmm. So we touch more than 50% of a buying group through our events program. Does an opportunity move faster than where we haven't touched that same percentage of buying group members through mm-hmm. Through an events program? And that has to take place inside the CRM.
Great. Thank you, Conrad. I'm going to take 2 more questions from the audience. For this first one, I'm going to ask you both to be super quick if you can. And I think you should both respond to this. It's a very simple question, which is, how do you see event tech playing a role in event measurement, but over the next 5 years? And I quite like that time frame that's being allocated. So not today, but bigger picture, longer term. I'm going to come to Conrad first.
I think trying to predict kind of technology 5 years out is a little bit of a fool's game. But I mean, clearly, the transformation is going to come through AI, and we're already seeing kind of some of where that's going. So things like predictive analytics, where pre-event, we have a good idea of what attendance is going to be like, based on the data we generated in terms of registration so far, and then recommendations around actions we can take to kind of increase registration. I think post-event, just that there's potentially so much that AI is going to help us do with that data. Okay. So I mean that's. For me, that's
I will stand slightly corrected. The question is actually a few years, not 5, which is slightly less. Rob, your turn.
Yeah, I think we're starting to see more development in AI agents for information finding on site. So taking that traditional event app and having quicker access to information, building those agents into those platforms. Mm-hmm. And I think the one that excites me, I think, which is incredible, is this whole live session summaries. Having that, again, from an attendee value perspective, we go to these events and we want to learn something new, but actually how many of us have sat there scribbling down notes, and when we're scribbling down notes we're not able to engage and listen effectively? So being able to have those summaries sent to us immediately after the event, I think it's incredibly powerful, and I think it's really, really exciting area. I think on the data and dashboarding element of it, we're starting to develop more of a AI agent on the dashboards, so that organizations can literally ask it questions to say, how has this brand interacted with our event lifecycle? How has this industry interacted with our event? How are people based in North America who came to our event? What are their interests? What are their needs? What are their wants and opinions based on? So it's it's an exciting time, I think.
That's a great segue into the last question, which is for you, Rob, and you've got about 90 seconds for the answer on this, which is, totally agree with the point that data needs to be integrated, but a big related question is how you can visualize and interrogate that data for insight and action. Any thoughts on best practice for this? And I genuinely can't think of a better person to answer this than you, Rob.
Yeah, and I think I said before, there's so much data available, and we can produce all of these lovely looking glossy dashboards in terms of this data. But I think the important thing is, how do you build this narrative around it, which is why we've developed that 4-pillar methodology to help organizations articulate what this data means. It's really, there's a lot of information online about visual storytelling, data storytelling. I think that's a real interesting area to be able to, for anyone, even without a degree in data and insights to be able to articulate what this all means. But I think it does start with the narrative, the foundations and the methodology to help organisations explain what this all means.
Thank you. So a huge thank you to both Conrad and to Rob for joining us and sharing such open, honest, and some really good actionable insights as well. So I hope you're all leaving today's session with a slightly clearer sense, not just of the challenges, but actually the opportunities, some of the actions, smart objectives, building stronger narratives, and potentially even thinking about how you might take a next step to cracking that integration headache, I think we could probably call it, for at least 4 out of 5 of us. Now, as mentioned right at the beginning, there'll be a follow-up email that will include the recording. We're also going to pop a couple of links to some of Conrad's most recent blogs in there, which helps expand some of what he's shared today. And there'll be also an invitation to join a conversation with Rob and the Event Footprints team, because they are building a very cool new solution, which is very much what Rob was just talking about right at the end there, called Event Stride. And it's all about helping corporate event professionals to create more powerful, more automated, more sort of boardroom ready measurement with a lot of visualization involved. It's still very early stage, so it's still at research stage, but very much hoping to include some folks that really need these sorts of tools in that final development process. So that's all from us. Thank you again so much for being a part of this. I hope that we'll see you at the next Best Foot Forwards webinar session, which will take place after summer. That's it for today. Take very good care and goodbye for now.